Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Brock Beard from lastcar.info coming at you after the conclusion of the race at Talladega, where unofficially your race winner is Chase Elliott, scoring another one of his victories here at the Super Speedway, a track where his father, of course, famously had the speed record. We'll definitely have plenty to talk about for that Cup Series race, as well as the Truck Series and Xfinity races as well. Before we get any further into this as well, I definitely want to extend my thoughts to those of you down in the Florida area after the events of Hurricane Ivan this week. If you're checking this out from down there, I definitely hope that everything is working out the best for you guys down there, and our thoughts are all definitely with you. So we'll definitely get into some racing here today. We're going to be talking about the Cup Series and Xfinity and Truck Series one. As always, we're going to go ahead and start with the Cup Series side of the schedule here. Hopefully you guys can hear me okay on this end here. It looks like I think we're doing okay, but we'll definitely jump into that. A little bit of everything this weekend, quite honestly, and we'll certainly get into that, especially for the Truck Series race here. I'm already seeing a couple of comments about that, and we'll definitely be covering that at the same time. But Chase Elliott pulling off a victory very well timed after the disastrous start to his playoff run here in both the it's a Hurricane. It's Ian, not Ivan. Okay, apologies. Ian there for the Hurricane down there, of course. So at the same time there with the races over at Talladega this weekend, very unusual set of circumstances. It's not really expected to really see a lot of races in Talladega with very low attrition. That was definitely the case here on this side, especially in the Xfinity Series, with a record going back to 1998 with the entire field finishing the race under power. And then the Cup Series race with only the opening, the big wreck there about 20 laps into the race, accounting for the entirety of the drivers that fell out of the event here. We'll definitely cover both ends of the field here at the same time. Very different stories among our last place finishers here. I'm not hearing the response on my headphones here. That's throwing me off. Okay, here we go. Okay, good. Now I can hear it better. Excellent. There we go. I need to make sure I can hear myself, because otherwise it just sounds like I'm swimming underwater here at the same time, so that's much better. Okay, good. So Chase Elliott pulling off the victory today. Ryan Blaney, oh so close to another one of his Talladega victories, as he has been so good at this track. His win in 2020, for example, wins in the playoffs here. Looked to be a shoo-in to actually pull off his first victory of the Cup Series season and become the 20th different winner this year. However, that is not the case this time around. A margin of victory unofficially of 46 thousandths of a second between first and second. A great run for Michael McDowell once again, who's had a great season here, not just on the road courses and the super speedways like this track this weekend, but at other tracks in between. His runs at Gateway, for example. But another fine run for him, just finishing in the third spot. Ross Chastain and Denny Hamlin, good buddies, finishing in fourth and fifth there. Running at the top 10, Eric Jones, Todd Gilliland, Daniel Suarez, Austin Cindric, and Chase Briscoe rounding out the top 10 there. Fantastic runs for a lot of drivers that really needed to have good runs. Cindric just barely making it into this part of the actual playoffs here with his struggles at Bristol not too long ago and trying to get past that first round. Chase Briscoe had a run that he absolutely desperately needed, and he was very much part of the mix there. Have to feel bad for Eric Jones. I know he won the Southern 500, so he's been able to kind of break through and get that first win for the 43 team in so many years. But in this one here, I mean, he seemed like he was the only driver that had anything for Ryan Blaney until the very end of this race. And it looked like we were going to be setting up for a pretty dramatic finish, even with 2 lines of single file traffic that just couldn't be able to, drivers seemed pretty locked in. It seemed like nobody else, even if they were just a couple cars behind, could actually kind of move up there. Denny Hamlin seemed very outspoken about that in his post-race interview, that these cars are struggling so much at the same time working their way up there. But Jones had a fine performance there in the number 43 car, still finishing in the 6th spot. Still got shaken out of line, just like he did in the spring race here when he was so close to winning in the Air Force machine. But still, I think that there's a lot of positives they can look at for Petty GMS and a lot of reasons that they should be very excited about their prospects for next year and beyond. Speaking of which, just outside the top 10, I don't know if it got much attention in the broadcast, but old Landon Castle with a solid 11th place run. Did a 2-tire or no-tire stop, I believe it was, very early in the race and kind of worked his way up there. The Spire Motorsports team in particular seems to just have so many struggles this year. We've talked about it a lot on the show here. The 77 finished last in this race last year with Justin Allgaier, and Allgaier very nearly was last place again in this race today. But in this showing here, following up on that great run at Daytona where they had to kind of survive a lot of wrecks, I know people are kind of eager to kind of put an asterisk next to runs like that because a lot of the field was eliminated. But in this particular case here, we had, no real big wrecks after the first 24 laps or so. Very clean, very aggressive racing, and Landon was still able to work his way up there. Was a factor in the Xfinity race too. I think he had probably one of his best overall showings here in quite some time. So certainly on both the Xfinity and Cup Series at the exact same time. So kudos to Landon there with the 11th place finish, actually finishing ahead of drivers like William Byron that were factors in this. Eric Almirola as well was up front for a good portion of this race. Kudos to him. Looking back to Kaulig Racing, 15th place finish for Justin Haley, had a good amount of nose damage from the wreck that began the race there, so that kind of threw things off for him, but still a decent finish there, following up what we saw out of him at Texas and other races earlier than that. Christopher Bell, your pole sitter, finishes in the 17th spot after very nearly colliding with the inside wall coming down pit road. Very crazy moment there, but luckily couldn't have been more than inches when he slid into pit road there, having that particular incident, but finishing in the 17th spot. Kyle Larson, Noah Gragson, and Kyle Busch. Gragson, your last-minute driver substitute there for Alex Bowman. Bowman was already coming into this race at the very bottom of the round of 12, looking to make a good statement in this race, but very frightening once again. The specter of concussions that has kind of hovered over NASCAR, especially since Kurt Busch's accident back at Pocono, remains a big issue here, and we'll certainly talk more about that as we go along here. Certainly the controversies over these cars, what is going to be done, what could or perhaps should be done, at least in the short term versus a long-term solution, is definitely a hot-button topic, and definitely eager to talk more about that. But Gragson mentioning at the same time that this was an effort to trying to get a really good effort out of this team, a really big opportunity to drive for such a top organization. And Hendrick, unfortunately, finishes further back in the order. I don't know if that first wreck had a role in that. It seemed like it's again, so tricky with these cars. And I guess this kind of dovetails with a discussion about these cars themselves. It's so hard to really be able to describe the particular problems these cars have, where, we see a car getting involved in a particular incident, but then there's so little damage to the cars. And of course, the driver ends up being, the brunt of just kind of absorbing a lot of that hit, which is absolutely counterintuitive to the design of these cars. We saw a little bit of that in the earlier part of this race when Ryan Blaney suspected that there was something wrong with his car and believed that it felt like it was damaged, but visibly it was really hard to tell if there was even any contact made to his car in that particular case. It seemed like that might have been a similar situation for Gragson, especially at the back of the field. One driver was very surprised, was very far back in the pack here, as Joey Logano was involved in the very early accident there. Didn't seem, again, that he had very serious damage in that. And the Penske team, if it was a toe link issue, they've had a history of being able to make that replacement quick enough to clear even the old 6-minute crash clock as they did at Atlanta earlier this season. But Logano back in the 27th spot, last car on the lead lap. Definitely in a good position going into this race as being the overall point leader, but he kind of used most of that mulligan here. I've got to look at the standings again here, but it's going to be interesting to see how things shake out for him and the rest of the field going into the Roval next weekend. Very surprised that Kevin Harvick lost a lap at the end of the race. It seemed like he was really one of the best pushers up there, although his car seemed very loose. It seemed to get very upset very easily when he was kind of working through traffic there, finishing back at the 29th spot, one lap down. Justin Allgaier took over for the Noah Gragson in the aforementioned 48 car, Allgaier in the 62. Allgaier, again, it seems like I'm writing about him every time he gets in one of these relief driver roles. Seemed like it was going to almost happen again in this case, so we'll jump into the last place battle here too. After a few exchanges between other drivers at the back of the field, including Michael McDowell, who had some very serious handling problems in the opening laps and was at the very back of the field. Austin Cindric had a pit road speeding penalty that put him back there. Roush Fenway Keselowski drivers were dropping the back and kind of waiting for things to sort out. But all of this culminating on lap 24 with the biggest accident in this one. Thankfully, no drivers seriously hurt in this. I didn't hear anything from Ty Gibbs on his end of it, but Harrison Burton was pretty clear that despite the fact that his car backed into the outside wall, that he didn't suffer any serious injuries, at least not that he led on from his discussion there. But at the same time, Ty Gibbs and Harrison Burton both eliminated in that accident. Really looked like it was going to be about 6 or 7 different cars having problems. But again, I think kind of a little bit of a trade-off here with how durable this car is in some aspects. And again, way too durable in other cases where it's really put the driver's health in risk here. We saw a situation where only 2 drivers were eliminated from that, Ty Gibbs and Harrison Burton in that case. Gibbs being your last place finisher, already his second last place finish in the Cup Series. His first one was back at Richmond in the 45 car, where they had an engine problem there during a long green flag run in that particular race. In this case here, very different situation there. Now driving the 23 car, so now he's finished last in both the car numbers, much as Bubba Wallace has now won with both the car numbers at 23-11. Kind of an interesting mirroring of things there. But the first last place run for the number 23 since Alex Bowman in 2014, back when Bowman was earning his stripes driving for BK Racing at the same time. So that unofficially, pending the results of post-race inspection, and given what happened at Pocono with Kyle Busch and Denny Hamlin, for those of you who remember this show back during that night, sometimes crazier things do happen further down the line. But thankfully in this case here, a safe race for the Cup one. I'll admit, coming into this, given a lot of the discussions this week, I came into this one pretty nervous. I'd have to be perfectly honest, and I think a lot of the drivers seem to indicate that too. I know there's been a lot of speculation as to what these drivers and teams are going to be doing coming forward, and unfortunately, there's still kind of a discussion about if there really is a particular issue, which I think is very problematic. And I think this will be a good transition to go ahead and kind of jump into that discussion here. As I tweeted earlier this week, the rhetoric being expressed by not all the drivers, but some of the drivers, especially the ones that are most experienced in Kevin Harvick and Denny Hamlin this past week, should be very troubling. It should be extremely troubling. And I think what happened to Tua in the Dolphins game this week, as was mentioned even in the broadcast today, I'll give the broadcast credit for not glossing over this, because it's finally a big enough story for them to kind of really finally at least touch on here in these. It's a serious problem. And I know that there is a little bit of a split. We've heard from people such as Justin Marks that are team owners, that are apparently satisfied with what their communications with NASCAR have been and the progress that is perhaps being made on the car behind the scenes, but we're still not having that transparency. And I think the evidence is clear from just what we're hearing from these drivers, for drivers like Kevin Harvick and Denny Hamlin. I have a hard time believing that, okay, team owners are being kind of brought into the loop as to what's happening with these cars and what they're doing and everything, while at the same token, a person that's both a driver and a team owner is being this outspoken on it. I don't think that the person would be that reckless to absolutely put their reputation on the line, and to the point where you're literally talking about, the higher ups in NASCAR and just having a different, a change in leadership, not just a change in philosophy, but a change in actual leadership. Very bold statements by Denny Hamlin there. And, again, kudos to everyone that was covering that story. It was getting a lot of attention, as it certainly should have, back at Talladega. And then weeks before that, Kevin Harvick in particular had been so outspoken about it. Of course, his fire at Darlington just recently, and the discussions that have been going on since then. It's a really, really difficult situation. And I think Denny's latest interview is particularly troubling because, it's like, how long has this been a particular problem? We'd heard whispers of this coming into the season. There, of course, were those discussions about how the car was handling in crash testing and about a dummy that was quote-unquote killed in the process of one. There was speculation about Ryan Newman's feeling about this particular car and perhaps it having a hand in his decision not to come back into Cup racing this season. And then at the same time, kind of on my own end, I was thinking about just like all the ones we've talked about in this show here, where we have these bizarre incidents that are happening, and this implication, kind of this murmuring among drivers that you hear, even during like the drivers only broadcast that Fox did earlier this season, that where you can hear drivers kind of talking about how hard these hits are and how much they hurt compared to the hardest hits that they ever had in other cars. Bubba Wallace having his wreck at Atlanta and saying he was worse than his brake failure at Pocono, where the car just sailed into the corner there at full speed, not unlike Jeff Gordon's very serious accident there in 2006. The problem is through this whole year, it's been kind of in the background, but it's kind of not really been addressed. It's not been really acknowledged as openly by NASCAR, and we're seeing this really come to a head at the worst possible time. I think that NASCAR is looking into it, how much they are doing it, and what, if anything, can be done before the end of the year. It would be helpful if you would hear that says, okay, look, we're hearing this, here's what we're working on, rather than saying we're working on it, saying this is what we're doing. It's not unprecedented. There were times where NASCAR would make aerodynamic changes to cars during a season, or they would introduce a new piece or a new part. Back in the 2000 season, there was a time where Pontiac had an aerodynamic disadvantage, and they introduced an entire rear bumper cover. More cosmetic changes in those cases. But certainly, if there's going to be a situation where something is going to be working better than what's already been put in place, that's where that needs to happen. And I think that it's been frustrating because obviously it's been just something that's been kind of just going and going, and we're having to kind of piece all this together ourselves and try to make sense of it as best we can. And unfortunately, when it's reached ahead, it really has. And with 5-6 races left to go, is there really any time for something to start come together? No, not if they haven't already. I don't think so. It would be nice if they, is it something like what they talked about earlier in the broadcast, where they could put perhaps, some more energy absorption foam in the back of the headrest, so it kind of balances how thick it is on the sides. That could be something that could be kind of looked at. But again, NASCAR has been so strict as to any modifications to these cars. So they've kind of created this box a little bit where I think at the beginning of the year, teams were trying to come up with ways to kind of offset perceived issues with these cars. But we've seen time and again, a little bit less so now, but certainly earlier in the season, where teams have had to kind of clamp down on what the actual issue is, whether it's what RFK Racing was doing with the wheels, whether it was the screens that were put on the Petty GMS cars at Pocono, things like that, where the penalties have been really severe. And at the same time, penalties going the other direction, where teams themselves are given infractions for loose wheels, where even viewers ourselves are not even fully comprehending what process needs to happen for these wheels to even be secured. If we're just not even understanding it until NBC did their graphic back in July, what's going to be the difference with the teams themselves and trying to figure it out going back all the way to the Clash back in February? it's really a problem, and I think it's galling because at this point, what I sense from the driver interviews, the ones that have been so vocal on this, is it seems like there's, it's either like a wait and see thing where it's like, okay, we're aware of that, we'll get to that, but like there's no timeline, there's no clarity as to what may be changed and when that change is going to be happening. And also at the same time, the drivers are kind of concerned about other races coming up. Denny Hamlin mentioning the race at Martinsville. Are the aerodynamics going to be just as much of a problem as they were in the spring race? Less of a concern on the competition side, versus the safety side. But obviously that was something that was really talked about with, that was the weather that made that spring race at Martinsville not very competitive. Did it have anything to do with the cars themselves? Now it sounds like from Denny's discussion that maybe that was something much more with the cars themselves. In the past, you would have a situation where the teams put these cars together. They work with the manufacturers, and again, maybe the manufacturers have changes to the cars too. More people were able to kind of converse on what changes were going to be made, and that I think the process went a lot smoother because now you had people that could actually make sure the teams were following the rules and make sure that different parts would be introduced and make sure that different safety improvements could be brought in. But now I think I almost sense that NASCAR is almost bitten off more than they can chew, because they're in a situation where now they have to kind of serve multiple roles here, not just actually performing tech inspection and doing the officiating, but now having this added role in place of the teams to actually work on this design of the car. When Denny Hamlin's talking about a fundamental, complete redesign of the car, we're not talking about just one part of it anymore. Now we're talking about much more that's happening there. So I know that others have come out and they're on other sides of this. And again, Justin Marks is one, Andy Petrie is another. There was a good discussion about this certainly this week in particular. But I think the fact that there's even a debate means that this should be taken as seriously as it certainly could. And that's something that really, really does need to be looked at, because if, and again, even if it's something that's not necessarily like, in hindsight turns out to not be the best solution to kind of fix something, at least show that you're trying to do something. Because when you just kind of move along and just kind of, plug your ears on something, if that's happening in this case, I'm not sure. But if that's the approach, that doesn't have a history of working out very well for NASCAR in one point or another. It's something that just needs to be addressed. And it shouldn't take something more serious to happen, or much less any other driver having a concussion in this particular case. 2 of these drivers already is too many, especially given the fact that in both cases, visually, even Alex Bowman's wreck at Texas did not look that serious. But obviously, from what was shown, and again, credit to USA for actually addressing this as seriously as it needed to be addressed. That was definitely very much of a problem there at the same time. And you can see, when Alex Bowman's kind of closing his eyes, it's almost like he can't focus. Like he's got you get like a really bad headache or kind of a dizziness, kind of that look there, and having that just so soon after impact. That should be really alarming. And what I don't get is why NASCAR hasn't just come out with their own representative. They have people that are in charge of this, and have them respond to this and have them actually make a more public statement on it. I think that's really the particular issue. So it's troubling. And I know that at the very least, the sanctioning body's got to be looking at this as just something that's incredibly inconvenient. Obviously there's never a good time for a story like this to be coming up. Nevertheless, at a time where you're trying to hype the playoffs in these last few rounds. And yes, you've had a really competitive season with a lot of different winners, a lot of different teams that are kind of, coming up to prominence, a lot of new talent that's coming up. But it's still their job to really kind of rein that in. And if they need to have more people work on it, or if they need to expand their facilities to accommodate this, that's well within their power. And that's where their resources should be aimed at. But I don't blame the drivers for being this frustrated. And I know there's been a lot of talk about strikes and things like that. I think it's too early to speculate on things like that. Denny brought up in his interview that was something that hasn't even really been discussed, really. Now, again, how much of that's going on behind the scenes, I'm not sure. But it shouldn't even be able to be in discussion. There should be able to be some kind of open discussion between the sanctioning body, because the consequences of things not being taken seriously are as serious as they could possibly be. And that's really kind of where that comes. So I'm glad that today's race was a safe race. I'm glad that there weren't any, serious wrecks there. I think this was a major bullet that they dodged in this ongoing debate. Now, obviously, other tracks coming up here. I mean, tracks like Homestead or even Martinsville could be places that relatively minor hits could still be a big problem. We saw it in Phoenix, the very hard hit that Corey LaJoie had during the spring race there, where it looked like there was some kind of an issue with the right front wheel that happened in that particular case. Any of these tracks can be dangerous with this, but something's got to change. Something clearly has to. And I think that the elder statesman of the garage area speaking out this vocally about it, even if there's people on the other side of it there, that's where it really deserves as much of a discussion as possible on that. So that's going to be kind of a different kind of situation there too. So we'll see how things shake out there too. But I know that's going to be a storyline that we're definitely going to keep following coming up here in the next few rounds here. So on that same note, we'll kind of jump into the truck series here because first and foremost, for this part of the show here, I definitely want to offer my thoughts as well to Jordan Anderson for his very scary accident that has happened in the truck series. I think that while we are all discussing about the Cup car and the safety of it, and that discussion needs to keep going, they can't forget what's happening in the other series as well. The truck series this year has, for whatever reason, had an absolute, and I hate to front load this with all this negative stuff here, and I apologize to those of you who are Chase Elliott fans, because I know you guys are excited too, so we'll definitely talk more about the Cup race and Xfinity and trucks, but these were definitely compelling storylines of the entire weekend here too. Jordan Anderson's accident was, I don't have to tell you how frightening it was. Jordan himself mentioned it after the fact there, as he's recovered there. Latest report indicated that he had suffered second-degree burns on his hands, his arm, the back of his neck, some of his face, and his knees, that he was airlifted, in fact, to a Birmingham area hospital for recovery. The latest report I had heard was that he was expecting to be discharged yesterday. I don't know if that has happened yet. Definitely let me know in the chat if that has changed. But the thing with burns, I don't have, thankfully too much experience with that. But in the emergency room I used to work at, we didn't really have a burn ward there. But from what I hear, the big thing that happens with that is the day after, when the body starts healing itself and responding to the burns. I don't know how big of an area on his body these particular injuries happened, but usually it's the next day or the next couple days that are when you really kind of have to keep an eye on these particular injuries and make sure that they're treated as well as they can be. It's no small thing at all. In this particular case, the report was that there was a loose fuel line in his truck, which explained why the truck just completely erupted in flames so early in the race with a large fuel load on the superspeedway. Thankfully, he was on the inside line and able to drop the window net. And basically, he almost kind of just was launched out of the truck, thankfully not at a high speed, but just after unbuckling the truck and starting to climb out of it, that kind of helped him the rest of the way and being able to kind of get to safety, where emergency crews were thankfully on the scene very quickly at that point. This is the latest in a series of fires that have happened in the truck series, completely separate from the problems that we've seen on the Cup Series side of the schedule. We've talked about some of these here on the show because actually in each of these cases, including Anderson's, they've actually resulted in last place finishes. So they've been very much a story that, while, not intentionally, it's just kind of turned out to be kind of a big problem in the truck series this year. We haven't really seen this traditionally, and they've been of many different causes. Haley Deegan's in Atlanta was a tire that came apart in the early stages of that race, knocked a panel loose, and apparently something ignited along that way, and she had to be helped out of the truck in that case. Spencer Boyd had an accident with Josh Realm at IRP, later on was pulling away from that, and he had a big fire in the engine compartment, and he had to bail out of that truck. And Dean Thompson, whose truck at Martinsville in the spring race had to pull to the inside, and you could see there were some flames or certainly some smoke inside the cockpit, and he had to get out of the truck at that point. So perhaps an electrical issue in that case. If you have these different modalities and these different situations that are leading to these fires in these cases, that needs to be treated as seriously as possible in that case too. So I certainly hope that Anderson is recovering as well as he can. I know that these next couple days, definitely keep him in your thoughts, folks, because that's going to be the time where there's very important treatments that they need to kind of do to kind of make sure those burns are kept under control, and that he is keeping an eye on that there as well. And it was good to see a lot of discussion about it there. A lot of people mentioning it, a lot of people following the story there. Kudos again. And again, I have a lot of positives actually to say with the networks this weekend, including even Fox Sports with Vince Welch's group. I was very impressed with how well they handled that. I know I've been probably more critical than anyone about what has happened in these networks, especially this year. And Vince Welch's group in particular. But I thought right from the get-go, right before even the truck had stopped, they handled that very well. And I thought the production staff handled it well by not showing the replay immediately until they could really assess what was going on. Good job by them. It's good. And again, that's what's always really frustrated me in the past with these particular issues with the broadcast, is they have it in them. They're capable of doing it. They have the resources, and people like Michael Waltrip and Vince Welch and Phil Parsons and so forth, they're not newcomers to the sport. They know about the risks and the dangers involved in it. They're aware of it. It's just when they go astray of that, it seems like sometimes they just forget about it, or they just don't acknowledge it when it happens, like the Johnny Sauter accident last year. But in this particular case, I was very impressed that they handled it as well as they did, and understood that it was serious. And I'm not saying that a broadcast needs to be serious all the time. There's a time and a place where you can be silly, or where you can be goofy, or where you can kind of, kind of play around with how, a race is really competitive and it's entertaining. I mean, it is entertainment at the end of the day. But when something serious happens, that you got to really pump the brakes on that. And it's easier said than done. But as I always say, professionals should be held to a higher standard. And I thought that was very professionally handled in that particular case. Now, in this same Truck Series race, of course, there was an issue with officiating. So, of course, we got to go back into that there. And, of course, the discussion here where you had what was going to be a incredible photo finish between Matt DiBenedetto and Brett Holmes, both coming across the finish line. Both drivers that had never won in the Truck Series. Both of them driving for teams that are on the lower funded end of it. They're not the big programs like your Thor Sports or your Kyle Busch Motorsports. Some of the many Chevrolet teams out there instead that are trying to kind of really make ends meet here. You have a dramatic finish, and if the race ended at the actual finish line, Brett Holmes was going to win the race by just a fraction over Matt DiBenedetto, who was already kind of in a full sideways, opposite lock after contact from Ben Rhodes and to kind of scramble to the finish line. DiBenedetto himself working below the yellow line, coming to the finish line. So you have this whole confluence of all these ridiculous rules at a super speedway. Behind them, you have a big accident with a couple different trucks back there that's behind the leaders and not blocking the path to the finish line. The caution flag comes out maybe just a couple seconds before the finish line. So the finish line is no longer the finish line. Now the finish of the race is going back a little bit, where Holmes isn't even second. He's third now, and Matt DiBenedetto is declared the winner. Now, again, and this is nothing against Matt DiBenedetto himself as the race winner. I think that it was fantastic that he pulled off his first win. I mean, I know there's people that have different opinions about him one way or the other, based on how his exit happened at the Wood Brothers, based on other races that, he missed out on winning, like the times he was driving for the Levine team. Again, it was a great story, and if it just was played to its natural conclusion, I don't think anybody would have any problem with it. In fact, this doesn't really have anything to do with him. It's a whole separate issue. The issue, again, is with the officiating and these rules that come into conflict with each other. And the fact that when this race ended, and you have them all just kind of, a barroom brawl across the finish line where you got Holmes, you got DiBenedetto, and you have Rhodes kind of in the middle of it, and they're all just kind of spinning and sliding across the line. You could have just gone to the photo finish, and everybody's like, hey, Holmes wins, and it's over. And everybody kind of celebrates that. But unfortunately, these other super speedway rules run into conflict. First and foremost, freezing the field at the moment of caution. Now, a lot of people didn't really understand my stance on this from this again, and it feels like this is almost a weekly feature again on this show. But look, freezing the field for any of the other cautions makes perfect sense because it's not the end of the race. If you have a caution for an accident on lap 3 or lap 20 or whatever, freeze the field. I mean, you're gonna have the lucky dog, so there's no reason for anybody to go up there and try to pass the leader before they go to the line. You want to get the safety equipment out there as quick as possible. The finish of the race is very different because at that point, you're going to have the drivers going as fast as they can. They're as determined to get to the finish line as possible. Their single focus is to get to the finish and beat everybody else. And you're going to see people making the craziest moves. And sometimes those moves do lead to accidents. And oftentimes, when those accidents happen, they have absolutely no bearing on the leaders. If it happens on the last lap, they're going to cross the finish line and they're going to slow down anyway because the race is over with. And at that point, you bring the medical equipment, you bring all the staff out there, and they can sort out the pieces and go from there. And that's going to be that's the way that they should set it up. When you have a caution that comes out an instant before they reach the finish line, is that going to make it any easier for them to bring the medical equipment out? Is it going to make any material difference at all? I really don't think so. I mean, is it going to stop the wreck from happening? No. I mean, what it's going to do at the most is it's going to slow down some of the trucks that are further back that are not involved in it. But again, there's still going to be some delay in that sense because they're still in the mindset of trying to reach the finish line, trying to maybe gain this spot or another. And NASCAR only has themselves to blame for this because they created this playoff system where, 1 or 2 points could be the difference between whether or not you even get to the next round. And it's hard to snap people out of that. And those points aren't awarded once, you get to the third stage. They're not awarded until you get to the finish line. I think actually this would be another point in favor of not having, handling stage racing and kind of taking it out of the equation. Because now they've created 3 different races to the finish line where if something happens and a caution comes out, or a caution doesn't come out in a timely manner, you're going to have a more dangerous situation there. That's where the challenge is here because, of course, now you've created just this whole different situation. And yes, under the rules, as they were, Matt DiBenedetto should be the winner of that race. Although, of course, Ben Rhodes is bringing up the situation with the yellow line rule, and then, that screws things up too. And of course, when is somebody going to make a move below the yellow line? Usually that's going to be on the last lap. So that's the other rule that I think is just ridiculous. And unfortunately, the problem with all these rules is that they always come into direct contradiction of each other. And it's been the same situation with the locking bumpers rule. We see that in the Truck Series and the Xfinity Series. Same situation in this case here. I mean, how much locking bumpers happen at the end of both of those races? And, it's like, okay, how long is too long? Was he locked on for like 2 seconds or was it 3 seconds? And, it's splitting things up and making things way more complicated than they needed to be. So again, I think in this particular case, and again, it's nothing against DiBenedetto. It's a great storyline already. It's been long in the making. I mean, think about DiBenedetto further back in his career being a start and park driver for the Curtis Key team or some of these other programs. The Tanner Berryhill team. I think he had some starts with them way back when they were running Dodges in the Nationwide Series. It's tremendous for him to pull off a win. But see, the unfortunate problem is you create all these other rules here, and now when you're going to write a story about this, like it's going to have to be explained. It's like, okay, well, yeah, he wasn't the first one to the finish line, but the field was frozen back here, and he was leading at that point, even though he lost ground by coming to the finish line, and it just muddies the waters, and it reduces the simplicity of what a race is. Get from here to there before everybody else. That's what kind of needs to be looked at here. And I mentioned this deliberately after the Jordan Anderson situation, because again, very different situations in that case. I mean, obviously, if you have a truck that's on fire, I mean, you're going to treat things very differently. If somebody is, if a car is caught air, if it's flipping or something like that, you have a very serious situation potentially where it could be something like that. But if you have a situation where it's just a couple guys spinning out, and maybe not even really hitting anything, or it's well behind the leaders, if you have to throw the caution, wait till they at least reach the finish line, throw the caution at that moment, and then just freeze the rest of the field, sort that out at that point. So that's the other thing too. I'm not suggesting that you just let the entire field go to the finish line here. At least allow the leaders to go for it there, because it just again, it muddies the waters on that point. And I know that a lot of that is from an opinion, standpoint, especially competition wise. But again, I think really for these drivers, they want to be in a situation where they're able to kind of determine it. Look how long that they had to wait before NASCAR actually declared that DiBenedetto was the actual winner of that race. Wouldn't it have been better to be able to just have the drivers celebrate in the moment, knowing that there was a photo finish and everybody cheers? They see like the photo finish camera and seeing that this person was ahead of that person by, however negligible a little bit of difference it was. Yeah, I would think so. But, again, this is kind of the tricky part with a lot of this. And I think the reason that, it's so important, it's not just on the competition standpoint, it's also in a consistency standpoint. And I'm seeing a lot of you guys kind of mentioning this here at the same time. There is so much ambiguity in a lot of these, and it shouldn't be a judgment call who wins a race. Like if somebody fails inspection, that's one thing. But if it's like, oh, he wasn't leading this guy at this point, where neither of those drivers could have possibly have been aware that that was the moment of caution that came out, when they're just focused on just getting to the finish line, or going below the yellow line, or being forced below the yellow line, or starting a pass versus completing a pass below the yellow line, and all these other just abstract things. And I know that every sport is about rules, and you got to follow all the rules. And look at sports like baseball and football, and how many things can happen, or things that do and do not happen after somebody hikes a ball in football, or somebody hits a ball in baseball or anything. But and NASCAR can still have plenty of those already, well within in place here. But it can't be that complicated. It can't be that absurd, because it just leaves a bad taste in everyone's mouth. And, I know I get a reputation for just griping about this stuff too much, and perhaps that's well-founded. I mean, gosh, we're 44 minutes into this, and we haven't even really talked too much about these other races there. But I think that's where, people need to kind of look at it there too. So it's unfortunate the race ended that way, because, again, I think that there was a lot that was handled very well, especially what happened with Jordan Anderson's accident there, recognizing things that are, as risky as they may well be. But again, I think that there is something unique about the last lap of these races that is beyond just putting on a good show and having it be, good competition to the finish. That I think that if you're going to throw a caution, I mean, if you're just going to have the white flag come out, instead of saying the next flag ends the race, say that, look, you got to get, the leaders get to the finish line. Like between now and when the leaders get to the finish line, that's it. You guys are on your own. And if somebody spins out, they're going to know they need to stay out of the way. They need to keep their seatbelt strapped, and they need to stay out of the way at that point. And, if other information comes up there that changes that, you can always have unusual circumstances that change that along the way. But I think that should be the norm. And it should at least be tried. I think it should at least be tried in this particular case. And I don't think that's contradictory to the situation that happened with Jordan Anderson's wreck and these other cases here. Because, again, I think we can all agree that, if you have another incident that's earlier in the race, there's no reason to have everybody be racing to the finish line. I know you want to see as much racing as possible, but you watch some of these older races where people are racing to the line 30 laps into the race. It's absurd. Just creating a situation where it's a little bit safer there at those points. Clearly there's no reason. There's nothing to be gained in those points. And I think perhaps re-examining the purpose of stage racing would make it even safer, actually, and just not even having that extra point where maybe NASCAR would be reluctant to have a caution come out at that point, or have a caution come out that muddles things up in that point too. So I don't know. I think it's a different situation in those particular cases. But yeah, I think that's really kind of another way to kind of look at that too. So yeah, I don't know. But it's these are the situations that are kind of an issue, and we saw that. I think, highlighted very well in this case. I mean, I said at the same time, you have a caution that comes out very late stages. I hope that doesn't muddle up what could be a really good finish. A lot of races have had races that could have potentially been really dramatic and played out that way. You have 2005 Talladega. You got, what was it? I think it was Dale Jarrett and somebody else was up front. I think it was Tony Stewart, and they were side by side for the lead. Kyle Petty spins out on the backstretch. He's still driving the car and driving it back to the finish line and actually getting there. And they don't throw a caution. They throw a caution for it. I mean, that car it's not a multi-car accident. It's not blocking the finish line. Petty's still driving the car, so there's not even a car for the medical teams to respond to, and they still threw the caution and froze the field well back here. We could have had a photo finish in that particular case. It's absurd. I mean, there's been a lot of examples of it that have been in that particular situation, and that's where things kind of need to be revisited there, because otherwise, what are you watching at the end of the day? I mean, why does everything have to be, cautions should be more of an irritant. I think that's the other cultural issue here. I think that, and we see this in other races that have long green flag runs, and I think this weekend was another good commentary on this too. When a race has a lot of long green flag runs, that shouldn't be viewed as a failure. That shouldn't be viewed as boring. That's racing. You're not paying tickets to sit in the grandstands, or your subscription to watch these on TV or anything, to see guys ride around under caution. That's not the interesting part of racing. And I know, when you get a caution, you get a restart, and you get that little moment of a scramble and all that. And certainly that played out well for Chase Elliott in this race. But think about the battle we had before that in this particular race, where you had Ryan Blaney and Eric Jones neck and neck. It could have stayed that exact same way. Or maybe Chase Elliott in that same set of circumstances could have worked out a 3-wide pass in that case. You would have had a better race there. A caution should be viewed as kind of a failure in that case, or it should be at least an irritant. Now, not to say they don't have a purpose, of course. If it's something serious happening, you better believe that caution better come out at that moment. But, again, if it's like, one car spitting out, or in the case of today's race here, a car just sitting at the exit of pit road against pit wall, not affecting anyone, in fact, kind of parked in about the same spot that the pace car is usually parked, what danger is there even at that point? The driver could even just climb out at that point and right over the pit wall, and that'd be fine. Versus a situation like we saw in the Truck Series race, where you have a crew member that's, tire rolls out there, the guy's walking out there. I mean, obviously at that point, you better throw a caution at that point. It's common sense. And I know these are closed cockpit races, and you can't tell what's in the instant, what's a serious accident versus one that's not. But I think on the last lap, there's such a negligible difference in the moment of wreck happens versus getting to the finish line, that it shouldn't make any difference, on that. But, again, and unless it's going to be something that's, clearly going to be too dangerous to complete, if it's going to be too dangerous for the leaders, and just make that a rule. Just make that. And so it's not a judgment call. So it's not something that the teams are unclear on. I think that's where it needs to be something that's much more important there. So, we'll see. But I think that's another one to kind of look at too. But yeah, that's another situation there too. Oh, it's actually the anniversary of that race, the 2005 Talladega race. Wow, hey, how about that? So you got kind of that situation too. The crew guy got his hard card pulled faster than Stan Barrett's rocket car on the salt flats. Yeah, exactly, Beast of Metal. That too. Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate. I don't like seeing somebody. I guess maybe this isn't anything unique to me, but I hate when I see somebody that's just, has something like that happen on public, TV. It's like, make a big thing out of the guy getting his hard card pulled and being escorted from the track. I mean, yeah, you don't go out there on a green racetrack, on a hot racetrack, and, retrieve a tire. I know that happened in Atlanta years ago. I think it was JTG's team had a situation there. And I know, in the moment, you're not thinking that. You're thinking, oh, gosh, I better get this tire and retrieve it there. And, it's just kind of, an instinct there. But it's the wrong instinct. I mean, because you're putting yourself in terrible danger. Somebody spins out, or even somebody just kind of hits that corner wide. It could be a very serious situation, and you're just out there unprotected. So, obviously, NASCAR had to respond as quickly as they did in that case. Otherwise, something very serious could have happened there. Very similar. I mean, a lot of people were actually asking on last week's show, and again, I didn't see the clip of it until then. But thank you for mentioning, the situation with Ty Gibbs' situation on pit road, where he and Ty Dillon made contact. In that case, yes, that absolutely needed to be treated as seriously as it did in that particular case, where you have a driver and these drivers are protected. They got their helmets. They're all, set up in these cars. I know these cars have their safety concerns, but they're definitely in a better position than somebody that's out there on pit road. It's putting their life in their hands, whether they're a crew member or a NASCAR official or somebody else that's out there. And in that particular case, where Ty Gibbs and Ty Dillon made contact, and Gibbs swerved into Dillon and very nearly drove the 42 into that wreck, I think that probably should have been treated even more seriously than it did. Thankfully they came down with at least some kind of penalty, monetarily and points-wise, owner points-wise rather, for the 23 team. But yeah, I mean, you can't be having that happen. But again, I think that a lot of these issues they all kind of connect together. It just takes firm leadership and alert leadership and consistency. And, I'm not the first one to suggest all this. It's been a problem for, much longer in NASCAR than anybody can remember. So that's kind of the situation there too. On the same token there, I guess we can kind of talk about this too, because kind of a layover from Texas. The penalty that was handed to William Byron for the incident with Denny Hamlin, it's just ridiculous. It's unfortunate, really. Now we've created a situation where Byron was going to be very easily on to the next round. I mean, he already was back there with Denny Hamlin at the finish of the Texas race there anyway. It's not like he went on to win the race or anything. But then he gets in a situation where he gets this points penalty, and now he's dropped he's back on the wrong side of the cut line. Now his teammate wins, so now he's in a really a challenging situation for next week's race, although he had a good run out of the Talladega race today. But again, it's no substitute for it. Just drew even more focus as to NASCAR not responding to that incident when it happened. The most ethical is a little too strong of a term, but probably the most fair way to handle it, of course, would have been just dropping the 24 to the back of the line, or maybe holding him a lap or something like that. Again, there's been a penalty box. We talked about that, I think, even on last week's show, where drivers can be put in a situation where if they're being too aggressive and they need to kind of get checked, or they need to just kind of be reeled in a little bit, that they step in. Obviously, in this particular case, they didn't have somebody that was watching that video. They weren't aware of it, and so they didn't respond to it. Once they saw the video, then they had to backtrack and come up with something else. And the best they could do was a points penalty. And unfortunately, did the punishment fit the crime? Maybe not. Maybe it would have been a situation where he was, he lost some number of points by being sent to the back of the field, but I don't know if he would have lost, 25 points in that case? I'm not sure if he would have fallen that far back or finished that bad in the race. It's academic at this point. I mean, nobody can really figure that out. But it was just added to the distraction of all that. I think it didn't make the situation any better. I think it just drew more focus as to how much of a mess up it was. And it's unfortunate because I don't like it. I don't like it for any party involved in it, really. I don't like it for Byron. I don't like it for NASCAR. I think it's just too bad that it shook out that way. So that was another part of it there. Looking back to the Truck Series results here, we talked about Jordan Anderson's wreck and, of course, Matt DiBenedetto's win. Congratulations to DiBenedetto on that win, especially a year after he came so close to winning the spring race here in the Cup Series for the Wood Brothers. Good to see him pull off that win, coming from 30th on the grid, which is also impressive there, too. Chase Purdy and Colby Howard looked very good in this race, finishing in the 7th and 8th spots. Parker Kligerman pulling double duty with the Xfinity Series had a good showing. Caden Honeycutt, very early in his career, finishing in the 11th spot. Clay Greenfield finally qualifying for his first race of the season. He finishes in 12th in the Cook Racing Enterprises entry there, the number 84, taking a 12th spot there ahead of guys like Chandler Smith. Parker Retzlaff in his Truck Series debut comes from the back of the field to finish in 16th. But other drivers further back, certainly having some bad luck. Kind of a mysterious accident that happened during this Truck Series race was the one that unfolded on lap 33, this being the one that ultimately eliminated Lawless Allen, Dean Thompson, and Brian Dozett from the wreck there. Dozett was shown on pit road with the right front damage to his truck. But the replays did not show him involved in Lawless Allen's incident in turn 3 when he had a right front tire go down and a very hard hit with the outside wall. It seems like Thompson and Dozit must have made contact at some point. It was kind of piecing it together from the radio. Thompson's team seemed to indicate that they had damage to at least 2 corners of the truck, and they did not make it back to pit road, which is why he's not listed under the DVP, but listed as a crash. And his scoring did not show him making it back to pit road. So apparently something happened with him in the 28 where he wasn't able to make it back to pit road, and the 40 truck was out of the race in 34th. It would be interesting to see if there are any pictures of the 40 truck there from that incident. I didn't see, at least from the last time I looked there, of what had happened in that case. But regardless, that finish actually gave Dean Thompson the lead back in the last car truck series standings this year, where he had a very close battle with other drivers in the lineup there at the same time. But him still now currently being the leader, now with 2 races to go for them. They got Homestead and Phoenix coming up. Going to be an interesting situation to see how that plays out and who is going to end up having the certificate at the end of the season. Jennifer Jo Cobb, good to see her back in the field. Unfortunately, having issues with the clutch from the very beginning of the race. Ends up dropping out very near to the end of the race, finishing in the 32nd spot there for her. Something I didn't touch on because, of course, the nature of Jordan Anderson's incident there during the early laps of that race. But a very unusual last place run for Anderson's team. I think one thing to kind of draw some positives from the struggles that they certainly had here is that this is actually the first last place run for Jordan Anderson's team since he started it back in 2018. They're running a large part of the schedule back then. And actually, in fact, the number 3 itself had not finished last in a Truck Series race since back in 1999, back when Jay Sauter was driving a truck for Richard Childress, painted much the same way as Dale Earnhardt's car back then. So very many years, very rare to see that particular number finish last. But of course, I'm sure we all would have rather not have taken place in the way that it did with that. And of course, once again, definitely sending our thoughts over to Jordan Anderson as he recovers there. Certainly one of the good guys in the sport. One of these guys operating small teams. I remember just a couple years ago at Phoenix, him trying to fix the jammed door on the back of his hauler there when he was trying to kind of get this team together. And the progress they've made since then, his truck team and the Xfinity team. I know Myatt Snyder had some struggles at the end of the Xfinity race there too. But again, I think there's a lot that's really happened with that program, and he represents some of the best in the sport there in terms of a lot of these scrappy underdogs trying to make their name in the sport and develop a program where they can open opportunities for other drivers to get in there and other programs too. So I think that's another one to kind of look at the same time. Do I think No Tires Just Gas? Do I think Jordan Anderson's out for the rest of the year? I'm not sure. Again, as I said a little bit earlier there, I think these next couple days are going to be a good indication of that. Secondary burns are nothing to sniff at. I mean, even if it's even if it turns out that they're not on large parts of his body, it was in multiple locations, that needs to be treated very seriously. And obviously, I'm sure he's going to have to do, some form of recovery there before getting back behind the wheel. And I certainly hope that they track down what was the issue of that fuel line coming loose and causing that particular issue. That's something on top of these other fires that have happened in the Truck Series that should be another story that should be followed up on coming down further along there. So that would be another one to kind of look at there too. Let's see here. Let's go into the Xfinity Series race here. Very unusual in this case. We talked about the very low attrition that happened in today's Cup Series race. Very much mirrored in the Xfinity Series race. Lap 3, third place Ty Gibbs gets spun out by Justin Allgaier coming off of turn 2. Looks like it's going to just be a huge mess, and it's just going to wipe out the entire field. Maybe we're going to have something that's going to be very similar to what we had at Daytona last August in the Cup Series race. Pulls a 360, it looks like, makes slight contact with the right front, the right rear of his car, and the entire field, 38 cars strong, miss him completely. Nobody else is involved in it. Nobody even has like collateral damage from running into somebody else. Amazing driving skills out there. I know a lot's been said about, you gotta have the Cup guys in the Xfinity Series. You gotta show them how these guys can do it. These guys can drive a race car. That was, and I don't think that was just dumb luck. Those guys absolutely, they scattered down the track. They used luckily the runoff is paved now, so it's usable in a situation like this that somebody can actually clear a wreck. And we saw a real positive example of the level of driving skill in these cars, and what they were able to do there. And Ty Gibbs himself was able to recover and still finish 7th in the race, which is very impressive there too. A very unusual race in the sense that even after that incident, that was probably the closest call that we had for the rest of that there. Had a very solid race, very competitive race at the end. Yes, there was some single file, kind of that choo-choo single file line competition there at the end of the race there. But it did ultimately culminate in a very natural and competitive battle for the lead. It did go down to the finish line. It wasn't determined by a caution. And A.J. Allmendinger finally has scored his first Xfinity Series Superspeedway win. Could not be any less excited in his interview there, jumping around there and celebrating with his teammates. The colleague team is a great culture over there. I think that they're right there with the Trackhouse effort in really having a great team experience with their drivers, and both of them trying to help improve the program and do the very best they can, and just showing just how much excitement there is. I always call the colleague team the dude bros of the NASCAR garage, with Chris Rice and Matt Colleague and those folks over there. They just seem like they're just like these crazy frat brother types over there at the college team. And I don't mean that in a pejorative sense. I just think they're just having just an absolute blast. And when things are great, they're having a great time. When things are bad, they're just like the angriest. And that's exciting. You want to see that level of excitement and commitment in the garage area. And I think that's great. And that was certainly the case here with this one. Mentioning Landon Castle at the same time with his great run in the Cup race today. Finished 3rd in that Xfinity race. Very close once again to getting his first win. I mean, we'll see what things are going to happen here in these last couple of races. Of course, Castle had that great run at Martinsville not long ago, back in the spring there. I mean, can things turn around for him? Sam Mayer, understandably disappointed, much like what we saw with Brett Holmes in the Truck Series race. Mayer was much more disappointed in his interview there, missing out on the victory, but very close to it. His day is going to come. I think that's the other thing that's very helpful in JRM Motorsports. I know Mayer, I sense, kind of like Bubba Wallace, seems like he's very hard on himself when things don't go very well. Back at Portland when he had the last place run out there, I know he was very down on himself. Stuff happens, but it seems like he's really learning from it and having some good runs out there. I mean, yes, there's been some struggles along the way, but I think that, I think he's definitely shown that he deserves that ride and that he's able to kind of really capitalize on these performances. I think he's at least as strong as Josh Berry had been in that car when he was, relief driving it for it last year. Of course, Berry had much more success in scoring all those wins by this point last year, but I think he's really getting close to it. Ryan Sieg at the same time, once again, what does this guy have to do to finally pull off his first Xfinity Series win? Seemed like he was leading the freight train there for a long time, but a great points day for him there, finishing in the 4th spot, really going to help him there and trying to advance to the next round. I thought that was fantastic out of him. Josh Berry, mentioning him getting in the 5th place. Parker Kligerman pulling the double duty on the same day between the Truck Series and the Xfinity Series, and then suiting up to do the broadcast today for the Cup Series. Talk about, you think your weekend was busy. My goodness, that guy has just been wearing every hat this weekend. 6th place finish for him, continuing a strong stretch here for Big Machine Racing when they don't have to have Cup Series guys there, Cup Series full-timers. Of course, Kligerman has his share of Cup experience, but coming after Nick Sanchez's great run at Texas, you got Kligerman with the 6th place run here. Hopefully they keep this streak going, bring some other interesting guys in there too, or put Kligerman and Sanchez in these next couple of rounds and see what they can do. Maybe that ends up being their new full-time guy next year. I still hate what happened to Jade Buford. I don't agree with how this turned out, where he got cycled out of that ride, because I think Jade was a big reason that Scott Borchetta was able to get that program into the Xfinity Series. But it is a hard business. I don't approve of getting a lot of full-time Cup guys in there to kind of step that in. I think that's kind of shortcutting it, and also kind of not really fair to the rest of the field out there. But a guy like Kligerman, he should be one of those full-time guys. I never really understood, even from back in 2013 when he was driving for Swan Racing, And I know that team had a whole lot of problems back then when the the sponsorship issues, and they kind of talk about a group that kind of bit off more than they can chew between the 26 and the 30 with him and Cole Witt trying to get something going, and then ultimately the team kind of folding up after that. I don't think Kligerman ever got a really fair shot at a full-time Cup ride, and hopefully, he could still kind of have that opportunity. We've seen it time and again with drivers kind of reinventing themselves in their careers. Allmendinger certainly knows about that. If he ends up being a full-time guy in the Cup Series, depending on what Kaulig plans on doing with their charters next year or their driver lineups, that could be another thing to kind of look at there too. The other driver that formerly from the Cup Series that did get chances in a full-time Cup ride, Trevor Bayne, was one of the most aggressive drivers in the first stages of that Xfinity Series race, but finishing back in the 13th spot there for Joe Gibbs Racing. Good to see a good performance out of that, and a decent performance there too. Sheldon Creed finishing back in the 12th spot, just behind a lot of the playoff drivers. Noah Gragson not quite able to get his fifth straight Xfinity Series win. 4 in a row, it's still incredible. It's still quite the accomplishment he had. Yeah, one of those was rain shortened, but he still had to go out there and get it back to Kansas. It's unfortunate he didn't keep the streak going, but I'm sure Allmendinger and these other guys are happy to still have their shot at punching their ticket for getting into the next round here. That was certainly the case this time around. J.J. Ely finishing inside the top 20. Got a little bit of screen time there. Driving the AMG Sport Chevrolet for MBM there at the same time. Joe Graff Jr. just outside the top 20. Looking further back here, again, Mason Massey. Haven't really talked about him yet. Being your last place finisher, a weird situation where they had a problem with the master switch from very early in the race, but they weren't sure exactly what the problem was. Had issues with the tacks flickering, all kinds of systems kind of shorting out on the 91 car there. They actually had 3 trips to the garage area in about the first 20 to 30 laps of this event, in between which did a couple of one-lap runs and still had the car very much under power. But kudos to Mario Gosselin's team, the DGM racing effort, for really trying to just get that car back out there and get the best runs they could. Unfortunately, they were in a situation where they were too many laps down and they couldn't get back up there, finishing about 18 laps down at the finish of this race and not able to pass any other drivers out there. But I'm sure they were just as surprised as anybody else that the race leaders were just lapping cars out there like it was a race in Michigan or Martinsville or any place else, to the point where you had lap traffic in front of the race leaders coming to the finish line. Very unusual race in that sense. First time since 1998 that an Xfinity Series race had the entire field finish under power. In that case, it was a race at Michigan, where you had 43 drivers that all finished under power and within 8 laps of the leader, with Tracy Leslie, I believe, your last place finisher in that event. In this case here, everybody within 18 laps of the leader, and even more remarkably, at Talladega in a playoff race. Very unusual, highly unusual in this case. I think it was very interesting, and again, showing once more that you don't need to have cautions. You don't need to have even big wrecks to have a great race on a super speedway. I think you could have great competition. I think the finish that we saw in Saturday's Xfinity race is probably what we would have seen in the Cup Series race today, if that last caution by Daniel Hemrick didn't regroup the field. Thankfully, it was still a clean finish. It wasn't the typical green-white checker we've seen, and we still had a good run there where people had to kind of position themselves and try to work their way around. I think it was a lot harder for people to make moves, whereas in Xfinity, it seemed like people could make moves very easily. Yeah, I think there's a lot of positives you can glean from a lot of the competition this weekend here, and I certainly hope that comes across. There's certainly no shortage of controversy, too. And again, I still think the Truck Series finish could have been handled a lot better by the officiating. But again, when it comes down to a race where you can't tell if Sam Mayer or Brett Holmes, I always get that screwed up. Brett Holmes or Matt DiBenedetto could pull off their victory in a Truck Series race. I mean, and in a race that itself, had some attrition, absolutely. But even then, not too much. I think we saw some really good super speedway racing in general this weekend. And honestly, I'm not exactly sure how to feel about it, really. I think it's refreshing given the absolute chaos we had last week at Texas. And, of course, the concussion that was suffered by Alex Bowman, too. I think that there was a lot that you could look at this exact same time. So, yeah, very interesting. Very interesting. So let me get over my notes here at the same time. I have some other ones. Oh gosh, did I put Ivan on the note here too instead of Ian? What the heck? Okay. Looking here at the same time. Oh, yeah. Let's see. Where was that? I want to pull this up too. Earlier this week, there was an interesting poll that was posted. I think was it Jenna Fryer that put it up about the drivers that were most liked and most disliked based on traffic on Twitter. Thought that was very interesting how that played out. And some drivers that people were debating about, there was actually kind of an interesting discussion between some of them there about the way that they were ranked on there. I want to kind of pull this up again. Where was that? I wanted to kind of get that queued up. Okay, here we go. So yeah, it was very interesting pulling this up here. A couple of other sites were pulling this up. I was very interested in this kind of list. It's posted up, I think it was back on Wednesday, and talking about, we had a situation where, which drivers get the most flack, basically, on Twitter. And Cody Ware being high on the list, and Justin Haley. I liked how they handled it, where they were kind of showing pictures of their dogs and saying, look, if you hate us, you really hate our dogs too. I thought that was really kind of, having fun with it there. I do think in a lot of the cases, the drivers that were most hated on here, and I kind of tweeted about this during this week too, I think it was mostly stemming from like one particular incident, one way or the other, especially since it was ranging from the beginning of the season to the end of August. I think that, certainly Daniel Kvyat, I remember I was very perplexed to see him on here, given the fact that he's made only about 2 starts. I remember his car being stalled in the breakdown lane in Indianapolis. For some reason, that got a ton of traffic, and everybody like, haha, it looks like he doesn't know which way he's going or he's lost. It's like, no, the car broke down. It's like, come on, give the guy a break. Cody Ware, I know there's been no shortage of memes made about him, which is unfortunate because he's one of the most decent guys in the garage area. I mean, he talks to me, and I try to, I'm not going to go over there and give him grief about finishing the back of the field. Heck, I love it when he gets a good run like he did at the Busch Clash qualifiers earlier this year. Good people out there. Justin Haley too. I think Haley kind of comes off a bit quieter, but I don't think he's anybody that you actively dislike. And I think his win, the fact that he's won that race earlier back in 2019, was it, with the lightning strikes in the 77 car. He's been very close to pulling off wins this year in the 31. Unfortunately, was part of that accident at Daytona. I don't know how much of that stems from the accident with Kyle Larson at the Clash or something. That's where I think a lot of these were stemming from maybe one particular incident or another. Obviously, you see Bubba Wallace at the top of the list there. That's unfortunate to see. I think, there's still, that's the Bubba Wallace scenario in general is always really difficult to kind of, talk about. I do think a lot of what has happened on that end there is trending the other direction. I think if you did this poll after his win at Kansas, I don't think that number would nearly be as high. But I do think that what happened at Talladega in 2020, I don't think anybody left that unscathed. As I mentioned online, I don't think NASCAR handled it well. I don't think most of the media handled it well. And the unfortunate reality is, regardless of how you feel about it, or if you feel that if he deserved any of the blame for what happened there, it ultimately cycled back to Bubba Wallace. And that was the unfortunate thing. And I think the more time that's going away from that, the less of an effect that's having. Yeah, you're going to have other people who don't like Bubba Wallace being in the sport for any other reason. You're not going to be, that's going to be a whole different situation. But I think that number, the fact that number is as high as it is just a result from all of that. So it's unfortunate, but I think that's where kind of that shakes out. And again, I'd be interested if they did this. I hope they do this at another time there, maybe show that some of these numbers change over time. But again, it was kind of interesting to see how all that kind of shaked out there at the same time there too. Also at the same time, the most loved drivers, it was interesting to see Suarez topping the list. And I think also, it's interesting that, Well, gosh, I mean, just the list here. I mean, obviously, the Sears Point win was absolutely, just such a tremendous moment. I mean, you actually had media members applaud when he finished his interview, which really you're not supposed to do. But like everybody, I mean, I wasn't doing it, but everybody else, there was a lot of people that were at the same time. Very popular win. Obviously, at Danny's Amigos in turn 2, that was a great moment. Didn't come to much of a surprise to me. I expected him to be high up there. I wasn't sure he'd be top of the list. I figured Chase Elliott would be top because he's got such a passionate fan base. He obviously saw that during the post race in this with people surrounding Victory Lane and everything. But Kyle Larson, of course, the defending series champion. Cindric, the Daytona 500 winner, being right up there. Alex Bowman and his trollish t-shirts. I think he enjoys that. Harvick is probably, he's kind of done that more lately. Harvick has, but of course, being one of the most senior veterans in the sport up there, I think that's where him and Kurt Busch kind of get on the list. Chase Briscoe. I mean, I'm still surprised Logano's this high up in the list. I know I'm wearing the Logano shirt today, but I usually, whenever I hear about Logano one way or the other, I tend to think that people just people don't like him, but, or just violently don't like him. But there you go. I'm kind of surprised Keselowski's not on this top 10. So I guess there's a lot you could really point at from one to the other. Again, I think that it's an interesting way to look at it there from one list to another. But But for any of the drivers, any of the ones, I hope that the people that, that populated the drivers on the negative sentiments there, I hope they get the chance to actually meet some of these drivers in person. Or, and I think also, I think the other thing you can really glean from the negative list is it shows which drivers need to be kind of featured more openly. I think even with Bubba Wallace to an extent, I think that, think about how popular he was, not to make too much out of this, but back in 2019, when he won the Monster Energy Open, if you pull up the video there from that win, look at how many positive comments there are on that. I think that's what I hated with a lot of the documentaries, that both the ones that they made on him, they didn't feature like that win or some of these other, victories he had back then. The second one did a little bit of a better job talking about his Truck Series career, which was good. But that's the kind of thing I think that can help a lot of those. I think Cody Ware has done a really good job kind of putting himself out there much more, talking about, his battles with depression, very similar to Bubba in that sense too. So that's kind of been the case there. Justin Haley, Ty Dillon. I don't think people really understand like who these drivers really even are. And, I get the sense like, Cole Custer too, where people are like, these kind of seem like a lot of drivers further down this list, not so much, Bubba or Denny Hamlin or Kyle Busch, but other drivers on this list where they're questioning why they're out there at all. That's where it kind of irks me a bit, because I think that people, really, you want to kind of learn more about these guys. If you have, what are some of the best runs that these drivers have had? And that's something I like to kind of really do on the website, even when somebody is a last place finisher, really kind of revisit, how their season's gone, or maybe some moments they've had that have been really good. Or if we haven't talked about them in a couple years, kind of catch up on, how far they've come or where are they in their careers. Actually, I guess Ty Dillon's really been open about mental health as well. There's a lot of connections on that. I'd be, I don't know if there's a direct correlation with that or anything, but, that would be another one to kind of talk about too. But, again, as with any poll, I guess there's always, it's going to be hard to really, learn much from one or the other. I think that's another one to kind of look at too. Also, let's see here. Kind of going over my notes here at the same time. Let's see. Thank you very much to those of you who were supporting the video that NASCAR Man posted this week that I narrated for him on the very unusual manufacturers that were a part of NASCAR in the past. I think those were, it was a very entertaining script. I had a lot of fun. I always have fun recording NASCAR Man scripts because I think he and I have very different approaches to the way we express content. I think he has a different view of motorsports in general, because I think for me, it's much more a focus on the Cup Series than everything else a little bit. I think he has a much more even-handed view between different disciplines and can kind of bring in other context there. He'd taken a bit of a break from making videos, but I was very happy to do the script on that. If If you haven't had a chance to check it out, definitely check out NASCAR Man History on YouTube and check that video out, showing about some of the more unusual cars that have filled out fields. I mean, you think about different drivers that maybe have trouble keeping up, or different teams. Think about if you had a different make entirely, where it almost seems like you got a car out of the infield that's like stranded out there in the middle of these much faster cars. Unbelievably, there's a lot of NASCAR history that produced a lot of these runs, including 2 last place finishes for the Tucker that had ever run in the sport there back in 1950, when it was a 3-year-old car at that point, and Joe Marola trying to get a race, and in both cases, never completing a lap of the race. That's one of the teams, that's one of the manufacturers that's featured in there. Many other even more unusual ones in that case, if you can believe that. But that's definitely something to kind of check out there if you haven't had the chance. Another person I want to give a shout out to, or there are a couple people I want to mention here, Elizabeth Blackstock and Alanis King on the release of the Racing with Rich Energy. I know it's a Formula One topic, but I definitely understand, how challenging it is to get a book together and to certainly put it out there and market it. I look forward to checking it out myself here too. But congratulations to both of them on that. I know they've been working overtime promoting that, and showing a lot of the video, even of the books being made, which I thought was kind of cool. But kudos to the both of them on putting that together. I know that I think the more motorsports books get out there, the better. And I think we're seeing a real resurgence of that. I mean, there's been Kyle Petty's book, and others coming out there. I'm still working on the Derek Cope book. Have an update on that as well for you guys, or at least on Cope himself coming up here. If you remember, for those of you who were around for our trivia show last week, definitely have a follow-up on that for you guys here too. So we'll jump into that here in a little bit. Speaking of NASCAR history and also just history in general, I was very much impressed by the interview that Dale Jr. did with Tony Glover, and the mentions of Kenny Irwin Jr. in that interview. I thought that that was a very eye-opening interview, listening to that this past week here, and talking about, really kind of bringing things full circle with safety in the sport and the effect it really has on these teams when the unthinkable does occur. We're very thankful that, stories like that are very rare these days with what's been happening. But I think the more you kind of reminisce about particular moments like that in the sport's history, it's one to certainly talk about. But if you haven't checked out that interview on the Dale Jr. download, definitely recommend checking that out. Don't mean to have so many plugs in this here, but definitely want to kind of keep that tied in with, a lot of the other discussions about, racing this past week here and everything else. And we'll get into our trivia section here in just a little bit here for the Truck Series, the Xfinity Series, and the Cup Series. If anybody has any questions from anything I talked about here tonight, or anything else that we haven't discussed here from the other races, definitely mention that in the comments. Let me get also Beast of Metal. I got your super chat on here, and oh goodness, I got a couple here I got to catch up on. Thank you so much. Beast of Metal 1989, thank you again for the super chat here. So grateful Anderson wasn't hurt worse, whether it's a fuel fire or the visual of a driver hanging half out of a car as it hits a wall. It was terrifying all around and could have ended far worse. Absolutely agreed. And again, thank you for the super chat on that. Absolutely. Jordan Anderson, and any of these drivers, it was a scary situation. I don't want to, hammer on it too much, but it definitely deserves extra scrutiny for what had happened in that case. Kudos to the broadcast for handling that as well as they did under the circumstances, including the information that was coming out along the way, brought up later in the Xfinity race, and then, of course, on social media later that evening. But definitely pulling for Anderson as he continues to recover from the fire in the Truck Series race the other day. Bowser Jr. XD, thank you for your super chat as well. Mentioning about the margins of victory. We can pull that up here as well. Let me check out that. Oh, hang on. There we go. So, yeah, we got the Truck Series, the Xfinity Series, and the Cup Series. My goodness, man, you're still boiling down this information here at the same time. We got that for the Cup race. Is this still today, or is this last week? Truck Series race ended under caution. 7 of the last 11 Talladega truck races have ended under caution. Okay, yeah, thank you for the clarification on that. Let's see. Oh my goodness. I don't know if I'll read through all of this, buddy, but you got a ton of information here. You really should consider doing something like a website with this, man. You can have everybody kind of check out these stats and these rankings here. And especially what's great with a lot of these statistics here. I'll read one here for an example here. To get an idea of 0.046 seconds for a margin of victory, the next closest finish was Kenseth versus Johnson at Vegas in 2006. It's 0.045 seconds. Next highest margin was 97 at South Boston between Randy LaJoie and Dale Shaw, 0.048 seconds. So yeah, again, kind of interesting to kind of bring racing history into kind of a different context. It's what I've always tried to kind of do on the last car page, but definitely appreciate you bringing the statistics up here on how close these finishes were. Today's Cup race, for example, according to Bowser Jr. here, the 78th closest finish in NASCAR history at 46 thousandths of a second. The 8th closest Cup finish at Talladega. The 15th closest Talladega finish of all time since electric timing and scoring. And the first race with that exact margin of victory. It just goes to show you, again, whether a car is a fender up on somebody or just one bumper to the next, it can be very much a factor in the outcome of that statistically too. So yeah, kudos to you on the statistics there at the same time. And thank you for the super chat there as well, Bowser Jr. We'll talk about that. Alrighty. Let's see. Holman Moody Road Course 61 Thunderbird. Yeah. The segment with the Alpha. I love the clips that NASCAR Man used in that video. I think he made a good, interesting discussion on that too. Alrighty. Bill Elliott fans are notorious for stuffing the ballot box. Yeah, I mean maybe they just excluded Chase Elliott for the most liked drivers ranking, but still kind of an entertaining scenario there at the same time. Let's see. Okay, I think we covered those topics. Alrighty. Okay, so we'll get into our trivia section here for later in the show. Do we have an announcement with a call? I don't see anything new on that end here. Still got videos from Mr. Hendrick posted on Pockrace's page here. Looking at the point standings. So yeah, we go into the Roval here to conclude. I saw we got a couple questions here earlier about the actual race winner for the Roval next week. Saw suggestions on Suarez, certainly. I think Chase Elliott is another one you certainly have to look at, especially with the momentum from this. He doesn't really have a reason to go out and try to win it, but he certainly could. Ryan Blaney, as we're coming so close to pulling off the victory today, him being the winner of the inaugural race. Yes, it was after the top two knocked each other out, but a victory is a victory regardless. Could be another guy that you can look at here. Briscoe, with his solid run today, is tied with Cindric for the bubble, both of them being on the exact same margin here. Briscoe is given the tiebreaker here unofficially with Cindric at the exact same point. Byron, Bell, and Bowman rounding out the group. Bowman would have to come back and win the race at the Roval in order to punch his ticket. It sounds like it's going to be a week-to-week basis like we saw with Kurt Busch. I don't really want to speculate as to whether or not he comes back in that race. Certainly it's a fast ride, and he'd have a good shot at it there. But it's going to be a difficult situation one way or the other. I think the driver's health certainly has to definitely remain paramount in this case. Bowman coming into that race now 54 points shy of the marker here. Christopher Bell, it's got to be disappointing here. I mean, he did have a decent run today, but not a great run. And unfortunately, in this current playoff system, that could be absolutely fatal to your playoff chances, regardless of how good you've been. Christopher Bell in particular, especially once he busted open the gates there and won that race at Loudon, has been easily one of the best drivers out there, just been sidelined by terrible luck. One of course, the many of the drivers that had the tire failures at Talladega, Texas. And then, of course, the situations here this week now put him in a kind of a different situation there. But Elliott, your winner. Ryan Blaney, Ross Chastain, Denny Hamlin, Joey Logano, 18 points to the good despite an absolutely terrible run today for him. Kyle Larson, 18 points to the good. Suarez, 12 to the good. Great to see on Suarez. I think the Trackhouse in general has really rallied around both their efforts and really improved. I think Suarez came into the playoffs a bit stronger than Ross did before Daytona, but Ross has definitely picked up where he needed to and doing it at just the right time here. So I think they're going to have a good bid at trying to make it into the round of 8 here, and perhaps an outside shot at getting maybe one or both of them into the Final Four. I'm not sure how that's going to shake out, but that'll be something to certainly look at going forward here. I think it's easy to kind of look at Chase Elliott and say that, he's probably not going to, be as open with trying to pull off the win there, but hey, he might try something crazy, and the Roval is already kind of an unpredictable race in one way or the other than the fact that Chase has been so good at it these last few years since it really started from the outset. He's just kind of had a knack for it. I think the next-gen car has changed up the paradigm a little bit as to who is really good at road course racing and who just had perhaps good road course cars in the Gen 6 era. Obviously, the precipitous drop-off of Joe Gibbs racing on the road courses this year has been very eye-opening in that case. So maybe the benefit would go much more towards Trackhouse or something like that coming up here. So I think that'll be certainly interesting to look at. Alrighty. Let's see. So I do not, let's see. Yeah, I do not see a call on tech inspection here yet. Yeah, and those of you who haven't seen the articles for the other races, the Truck Series, I did do an article still on Jordan Anderson for the Truck Series race, as well as the Xfinity race with Mason Massey. Both of those are featured. Unofficially looking for a Ty Gibbs article tonight, pending, of course, the results of post-race inspection, and we'll see what happens on that end. We'll go ahead and jump into our trivia section here. I have our device here, our late 1990s Tiger Electronics deal here. Whoop, hang on. Alrighty. And so, once again, we'll go ahead and do this. We'll go ahead and have you guys make your picks in the section here. I do have something for our show and tell segment, because I know we haven't done that the last couple of weeks, so we're going to jump back into that. I have a little something. I want to kind of jump into that. But we'll get into there in just a moment. So, again, the categories on the trivia section here are NASCAR, pits, teams, tracks, drivers, and the wild card. Go ahead and mention in the comments which category you'd like, and we'll go ahead and jump into that here in just a little bit. So again, once again, the categories are NASCAR, pits, teams, tracks, drivers, and the wild card. There you go. It was Petty more loved or hated during his own dominant times? Good question. Depends who you ask. I think it's probably could say that about just about anybody, Philip, but it's a good question. If you had social media back then, I'm not sure where exactly Richard Petty would rank, but obviously we still have him now, and I don't think he's overly negatively perceived there, that's for sure. But there you go. I know if you're more of a fan of the Allisons, I imagine it would be a very different description. Or if you're a David Pearson fan, maybe that would be very different in that set of circumstances there. But another thing to look at. So once again, NASCAR, pits, teams, tracks, drivers, and the wild card. Those are your categories. We'll do some questions here in just a moment. Go ahead and keep submitting any questions you have. I'm going to go to the loading screen here for just a moment because I need to actually grab the thing for our show and tell segment here. So rather than give you the wonderful side of me stumbling out of this chair and around the room, I'm going to pull this up here for just a moment. So stay tuned, folks. I'll be back in just a moment. Okay. All right, we're back, folks. Alrighty. So, yeah, we'll get into this. We got 2 for pits, 1 for teams and drivers, 6 for tracks, 7 for wild card. So it looks like wild card is the leader. So we'll go ahead and do some wild card questions for tonight to wrap up the show here for this evening. Seeing your questions here about the inspection or the repeal possibly of Byron's penalty or the appeal of it currently at the moment. Andrew Bremner, seeing your question on that. Yeah, I mean, I think that, it's unfortunate. I don't think NASCAR is going to change their mind. I really don't. I think they're going to say, look, this was something that NASCAR screwed up on. It was probably going to be in effect. I think maybe if they do anything, they might reduce the number of points that they penalize Byron, but that's going to be kind of controversial too, especially going into the last race of this round with Byron trying to kind of get back in. I mean, where was he again on the points? I mean, it's a yeah, he's 11 points out. So it's yeah. I mean, if you had any kind of adjustment on that, it's going to reek of favoritism, and I think you're going to have a problem with it, especially with this particular set of circumstances. I'm glad that they kind of corrected themselves on Jeremy Clement's penalty, where it was a matter of if he's going to make the playoffs or not, because I think the punishment didn't fit the crime in that situation. But with this particular case here, I think it's going to be. I don't think it's going to change anything. I think it's going to still be in place. So yeah. Favorite superhero themed paint scheme, Alex Luft? I hadn't really thought about it. I mean, always I think the Batmobile schemes. I mean, basically anything that was Batman produced was just such a perfect marketing thing because, of course, Batman already has a car, so you kind of have like a lot of fun with that. Some of them are better than others. I mean, the Christopher Nolan paint schemes weren't very good. I know Junior won in one of them when he finally broke his winless streak at Michigan. But I think back to, kind of the ones that Mark Martin ran. The thing that always cracks me up with that, I was kind of thinking of it when you were mentioning it, was back in 2004 where they had like the whole Justice League paint schemes. And it's like, which one of them was going to win? It's like, well, of course, the Flash won. It's like, oh, yeah, shouldn't the fastest one win? It seemed like it should have been obvious in hindsight, not just the fact that it was on Greg Biffle's car. But the thing that's always interesting to me with that, too, was, of course, that was Carl Edwards' first run with Roush. And Jeff Burton was going to run that. So actually the diecast released of the Green Lantern paint scheme for that promotion had Jeff Burton's name on it still. But, of course, that turned out to be Carl Edwards' first ever Cup Series start, where they kind of did this shuffle and Burton went over to Childress. So that was kind of interesting. Oh, we have the tech complete on this too? Okay. Let me refresh that too, and we'll cover that. Yes, posted by Bob Pockris 1 minute ago. Tech is complete. Elliott is the winner. Harvick and Truex cars to R&D. So yes, Chase Elliott is your winner. Congratulations again to Chase Elliott, and I'm sure his many fans. And I'm sure the siren is already playing if it wasn't already earlier at the checkered flag. So congratulations to him. Chase now putting himself in a fantastic position after a very disastrous start to his playoffs. Win solves a lot of problems there, and that's certainly the case for him. So will be a Ty Gibbs article tonight on the Last Car page. Look forward to that a little later this evening. Oh, Bill Elliott's Spider-Man paint schemes. Yeah, those are good too. That was another one. Pedro Fluffington, Daytona 500 pick for 2023. Bubba might finally break through. He was my pick this year, and 2 runner-up finishes in it. He's looking really good. If it's not him, maybe Blaney. Blaney always seems to be right place, wrong time, and just kind of almost gets it. But I mean, again, what is the garage area going to look like, and who's going to be where? I think if Ty Gibbs gets a Cup ride, and of course we still don't know that. I know he's been almost, people are kind of waiting for him to get the 18 with Kyle Busch making his announcement, and it seems like that would be the most logical thing to happen. But again, we don't know. We don't know what the situation is. He could not have a ride at all and just stay in the Xfinity another year. It's very possible. Hard to tell. But I think of the drivers that are there now, I can't imagine Bubba's going to keep coming up short too much longer. I mean, he's become such a great super speedway driver. The other one you got to look at, and actually this was mentioned kind of on Twitter this week, and if this is going to be a possibility too, if Austin Hill gets a Cup ride, even if it's an open entry, I would absolutely be paying attention to him. even if he's just like an open car, like the 33 that he ran at Michigan, he has been so impressive. And I know it shouldn't be entirely surprising. A lot of people were mentioning on social media, of course, his win in the Truck Series race there. But, Truck Series Super Speedway racing is one thing. Xfinity Super Speedway racing, even in Atlanta, he has been absolutely outstanding. And very, it's just so interesting to see because he's such an unassuming driver, or at least an unassuming personality from what I've seen in his interviews. Kind of like Justin Haley in that way, where, he's so good. But I mean, I think he's even better than Haley, which I didn't think was possible. Haley was really lighting him up there in those Xfinity runs for Colleague. And I don't know how much of that was team versus driver. Haley's still been kind of coming close this year and a couple times at the super speedways. Hasn't quite found that way in there. But that would be another guy I would kind of look at there too. But we're really going to have to kind of understand what the complexion of the field is going to look like next year and who's going to have how many cars and so forth there. Austin Hill is a full-time Cup guy. Could possibly be a case too. Not sure how the charters are going to work out there. Childress had 3 cars not too long ago. But that would be another thing to kind of look at there too. Favorite to win the Xfinity Championship, I mean, it's Ty Gibbs to lose. I think. Even with Noah Gragson's ascendancy and the fact that Gragson won the spring race at Phoenix, I still think Ty Gibbs is going to be very, very tough. But again, it could be Gragson. It could be Gragson. It would be tremendous for him, and he's definitely got so much of the momentum here. But I don't see Ty Gibbs getting his doors blown off as much as easily as what happened with what happened with other drivers like when Austin Cindric, or rather Chase Briscoe, was going for the championship in 2020. I thought that was surprising already enough that he was struggling so much down the stretch. It could be a situation like that, but I think he's going to be tough. I think it's going to be very difficult to get that away from him. So we'll see how that kind of shakes out. Allmendinger, I don't know, maybe. I know Allmendinger's got a lot of favorites. I haven't given as much thought to the Xfinity Championship as the Truck Championship, because I think that's Ty Majeski. I think has got to be. I know he's only. We don't know who the other 3 are right now, and who's going to find their way in there. But I would pick Gibbs. I'm starting to second guess myself. Maybe I would pick Gragson over Gibbs. Because Gragson is he's looking really good. I mean, my goodness, I'm very impressed with just, how effortlessly he's pulling off these wins. And I know it's not effortless, because he comes out exhausted, and I hope he finds out what's causing him to get sick all the time, because that needs to be addressed too. But yeah, it could be him. And I would still probably pick Gibbs over Allmendinger, but, again, we don't know what's going to happen now, but I mean, it's going to be tricky. It's going to be tricky. Yeah, Truck Championship's pretty wide open. I think it's going to come down to Ty Majeski and Zane Smith. Zane Smith was so good at Phoenix last year and so absolutely crushed that he couldn't win that race. Back when he didn't know where he was going to go. He didn't know what his next ride was going to be. And thankfully, with Todd Gilliland going into the Cup Series, that opening happened at Front Row Motorsports. And I think he's had an even better year with that team than he had with GMS last year. And he was already looking really good with GMS. So I think I think that's who he's going to come down to. And if it comes down to Gragson and Gibbs for the Xfinity Championship, that's going to be exciting. I don't think Allmendinger is going to do it. I don't think so. I've been wrong. I've been wrong plenty on things much smaller than that. But that's what I'm looking at. I think that's what's going to be the situation. I think even if you get I think the same thing with the Truck Championship. Even if you get like Stuart Friesen or Ben Rhodes in there, or Grant Enfinger, who I think are very, very good and very capable of getting up there. I think it's going to be a Ty Majeski versus Zane Smith show, and I think that's going to be a damn good show. So that'll be something to kind of look at. As to the Cup Series, don't even know at this point. I think one of the Trackhouse guys is probably going to make it. Chase Elliott's looking too good to fail at this point now, which I wouldn't have thought of coming into this race. I would have thought for sure he was not going to make it to the Final Four. Dennis is probably going to still make it in. Denny always seems to find a way, one way or the other. So what? That would be Denny, Chase, either Ross or Suarez. I don't think it'll be Ross and Suarez. I think it'll be one or the other. They're kind of in a dead heat right now. I would pick either of them at this point. And then the fourth one, it could be a Logano getting in there, but he's going to really have to turn the ship around, or Ryan Blaney's going to Bigfoot him to a Ford spot. Not to say that it's one for each manufacturer, but of the Fords, it's going to be knives out on that. So I don't know. I don't think it's going to be Cindric. I don't think it'll be much further. Although it'd be interesting to see Cindric make the Final Four after losing at the last second in the Xfinity Championship with the Daniel Hemrick situation. So I don't know. Michael Jensen, thank you for your super chat there. Glad it was a safe race today. Any possibility that the drivers were taking it cautious today because of the issues brought up this week? Almost no 3 wide and no 4 wide like normal. Absolutely. I think that could absolutely be argued, Michael. It's a very good point. I think we still saw some pretty aggressive moves for actually trying to get stage points. We still saw people get kicked out of line, which was interesting. But yeah, I think it can certainly be argued that they were maybe keeping things too wide just to make it a bit safer. And I think when, it seemed like the only wreck that we had really, the big wreck with Harrison Burton, pretty much was from an attempt to try to go 3 wide and kind of thread the needle there. But I think that was, but I think you got a good point. I mean, it could certainly be possible. There was definitely, questions about that coming into this race. But I think in spite of that, we still had a pretty decent race in all of that. So that's been good too. Philip Bailey, any idea who the 50 team is? I think they're going to have Connor Daly run that car. The money team's coming back this week, which is good because I don't think we've seen them since the 600. So it'd be great to see them back out. I'm still waiting to see the New York racing team come back because I like their style and I think their paint schemes are pretty cool. And I think Jonathan Cohen's a cool guy, so I always run into him all the time. So I'd love to see them have a presence again, especially in Vegas or Phoenix here, where we'll be covering those in just a couple weeks. In fact, we're actually kind of getting ready for the Vegas weekend here, Lastbro and myself. And I ordered the magnets for the car door, so those should be coming in this week. So not too late. If you haven't joined the Patreon yet and you want to get your name on there, you can join that through the entire weekend, and we get your name on there for as little as $1. So there's that too. Where are we? Okay, we'll get to do the chat. I'm sorry, we'll do the trivia here. Which one we had? It was Trax, right? Was it Trax that was the leader, or was it the wild card? Wild card was okay. So we'll do wild card questions here. Alrighty. Here we go. First question, folks. And again, keep in mind this is the late 90s here. Late 90s questions. What race announcer has also done the play-by-play for Alabama football games? What race announcer has also done the play-by-play for Alabama football games? Yeah, 11 is not going to R&D. Nope. If Gibbs does not go to the 18, Austin Foster, who will? I mean, if it isn't him, I'm trying to think of who else is even in the pipeline there. I mean, Gibbs is, just running so well. I'm not sure. All right, so more guesses for Ken Squire, Bob Jenkins, Eli Gold. A lot of you got it. He still does it. He does indeed. The answer is Eli Gold, who does play-by-play for Alabama football games. As we do this here, I do want to do another follow-up here. I did tease this a little while ago. I did get a hold of Derek Cope and asked him about his model ships question, and he did get back to me. So let me give you the information on this. I want to read this off my phone to make sure I'm reading it correctly. So I asked him about this on Monday, and he got back to me that afternoon and said that what his hobby was specifically remote control hydroplanes. So not like ships in a bottle, not like model ships you put on a counter. It was remote control hydroplanes. And he said that he did it when he lived back at Lake Norman. So he just kind of, had the boats running out on the lake there at the time. He doesn't do it now because he doesn't live out that direction, or at least not on Lake Norman at the time, it sounds like. But that was the hobby. So for those of you who were on our show last week, again, it was the hobby was remote control hydroplanes, specifically on the question there. So the model ships question. Also, I noticed we didn't do the show and tell thing. We'll do another question and then we'll jump into that at the same time. So we did get a follow up on that. Still, the Derek Cope book's still in the works too. I'm talking with people working on the cover illustration. That's still, we don't have any new updates on that, so I haven't been able to submit it to the editor yet. Once we get that, we'll get to that point, and then hopefully get a lot closer to an actual release date for you guys. Next question here. What month did Big Bill choose for the first ever race at Daytona Superspeedway? What month did Big Bill choose for the first ever race at Daytona Superspeedway? Yeah, it sounds pretty fun. It does. Yeah, it sounds like he doesn't do it now, but it sounds like a lot of fun. Yeah, even with that, the 18 is obviously Gibbs. I mean, they're just prolonging it. They might just be waiting until Phoenix to make an announcement, or maybe after the season is over, and just see how his championship goes in Xfinity. I mean, it's a lot of distractions. I mean, then again, I mean, that hasn't kept Noah Gragson from announcing the Petty GMS thing well before, all of this, and maybe finding a good time to announce it. But yeah. What month did Big Bill choose for the first ever race at Daytona Superspeedway is the question. All right. What month did Big Bill choose for the first ever race at Daytona Superspeedway? And the answer, of course, is February. February is the answer. Could it be that Kurt hasn't decided yet? Very good point. Very good point. That could be the piece that moves the rest of the chessboard there, Michael. So it's a good point. Yeah, does he end up staying with 2311 since he's already driving for him? Or does he go over to Gibbs? I mean, I think it's interesting. One thing I've noticed is that, when you go to Ty Gibbs' page on NASCAR.com store, they're actually selling out of the T-shirt where he ran, because they haven't made merch out of him being in the Cup Series, but they're selling out of the one that he ran the Jordan brand paint scheme at Richmond. He finished last with, actually. The only reason I know that is I did pull the trigger on that because I thought it was cool. First of all, I think it's a cool looking shirt, but also, of course, it's a last place finisher, so it's like, well, I'm gonna have to wear that on the show at some point. I believe in Ty Gibbs. I think he's going to be an interesting talent in the series. I don't. Saying that though, I don't think that it was smart for him to do what he did at Texas last week, blocking that guy on pit road and causing that accident. That was very serious, and he's got a lot of maturing to do. But I think in terms of raw talent, in spite of the whole thing with, of course, being, kind of the heir apparent to get into the Cup Series here, I think he's a very exciting talent, and I was very, very impressed with his debut at Pocono. I can't play favorites, but in the sake of transparency, I'll admit that's kind of what I'm looking at here. If it turns into a great battle between Gragson and Gibbs, I've mentioned this before, I think that would be fantastic for the sport, because I think the sport is looking for its next Petty and Pearson. It's not just one personality. We're looking for a couple that are very equally matched personalities. I think that's what we're looking for. We have a lot of drivers that are pretty good at winning any track, but two of that group that just completely distinguish themselves, I think we're still kind of working towards that. So that's a thing, but that's kind of where I'm looking at there too. I know. But yeah, I don't think the kid's perfect, and I think he's got a lot of things to learn. But I mean, it's interesting, and we'll see. I've been wrong before. I've been wrong about other personalities and other people coming up through the sport and things that just haven't worked out, and maybe this isn't going to be another one. I don't know, but we'll see. Yeah. No Code Red tonight. No, we got the. I couldn't get more of it in town. I don't know if it's a supply chain issue, but yeah, this week it's the Frostbite Mountain Dew on there. Not bad. It's. I still prefer the cherry, but this one it's kind of like it almost doesn't work for the fall because it's much more of a summery flavor in spite of the name. It's got kind of like a popsicle flavor to it. It's pretty good. It's pretty good. All right. Oh yes, the show and tell segment. We're juggling too many things here. We'll go ahead and jump into that. So show and tell here. This is one thing I've had here for a bit. Actually not too long ago. That I just picked up here. So this is a custom diecast that I added to the collection here, and I definitely want to show it. And this one here is one that maybe some of you that are long-term viewers of the site might recognize. This is Front Row Motorsports Start and Park number 55 car from the 2011 season. And this person that made the rendering of it here, I'll see if I can get it into focus. There you go. You can kind of see it a little bit better here. Did a wonderful job on it. Not just a rush job, but clear coated it really nice here. The 2011 version even put rubber tires on the thing, which I was very impressed by. This was the paint scheme that Front Row Motorsports entered back then, back when start and parks were much more common. It feels like it's such a bygone era at this point that the structure of the sport has changed so much. But this is the exact same paint scheme. The reason I went for this was it had not just the fact that it was a start and park paint scheme, it very nearly won the 2011 championship in a charge from behind, competing against Michael McDowell when he drove for Phil Parsons Racing. But at the same time, it's the same logo I used for the Patreon logo. Rob Dostey, I believe, sent me the picture from New Hampshire when he was at the track, showing the number 55 going behind the wall. So it's kind of interesting seeing a die-cast rendering of that exact car. This one actually has Travis Quapple's name on it. Quapple did run it for a number of races. Jeff Green, I believe, actually ran it in the picture that Rob shared there that's now on the website. But if you check that out. But yeah, nice detail on it. I mean, I know for a paint scheme that doesn't really have sponsors on it, detail may seem like kind of an absurd thing to focus on. But I think it's really nicely done. And, even with the old Ford there, I thought personally the cars hit their stride in like 2011 to 2012. I think that once they got rid of the rear wing and they got rid of the splitter, they kind of smoothed it, or they didn't really the splitter necessarily, but kind of that big gap with the brackets and everything, and kind of smoothed the lines out. They were left with a pretty good and ultimately pretty safe car for that time period. I mean, there's a lot that can be learned, ironically, from the car tomorrow into what the cars today are there too. I think they tried to modernize some aspects of it, but that's been there too. Yeah, J.J. Yaley drove it too. Yeah, so that's another one too. But yeah, definitely wanted to show that on the show here tonight. So we had that too. But yeah, so let's see, where am I? Do I have any other notes on this at the same time? No, I think that's it. Okay, so we'll do a couple more questions here for you guys now that we have the inspection call already. Let me get the next question here. See if we get a harder one. We had some really good wildcard questions like the Derek Cope thing with the model ships, but we'll have to go into that. Alrighty. Here we go. Here's a good question. What was the dominant car on the NASCAR Winston Cup circuit in 1961? Don't look it up. Okay, just try to guess here. What was the dominant car on the NASCAR Winston Cup circuit in 1961? 1961, what was the dominant car? Yeah, 2011 was a great season, racing-wise, in the Cup Series. Certainly in that one there. I mean, dramatic. This is probably, this season here is probably about the closest in terms of that kind of competition since 2011. A lot of first-time winners. I liked the two-car tango at Daytona. I thought there were a lot of interesting teams. The last car championship went down to the last race, and the Cup championship. Very dramatic. And, of course, Tony Stewart's championship has fallen into legend now. Since then. So that's definitely another one to look at. What was the dominant car on the NASCAR Winston Cup circuit in 1961? Patrick Flanagan, I see your question there on the Stanton Barrett video. I don't know if you were in the show last week, but I did have an announcement on that. I haven't tweeted it, so you likely haven't heard the information. At the moment, and I've already told the people in the Patreon this too, so it's cool sharing this here. The Stanton Barrett video is being postponed. At the moment, it is likely not going to be in Rise of the Field fillers. It will likely be a driver standalone video. I had a very good conversation with Stanton about a couple weeks ago. We had some notes on it there, and I think the direction that he's more comfortable with, and I want him to be comfortable with it because I want to get the best information from his interview because he was already kind of sharing some details about his career that didn't come up in any of the other research materials I had. It's like, wow, this would make a good video of its own. It's probably going to end up rewriting the script, or at least large parts of the script, which is going to take some time. So that's been kind of pushed back a bit. But luckily, something else has been pushed to the front, and I mentioned this on the show last week. And again, if you're, you didn't hear on this last week, I'll mention it again here. My latest project is actually going to be a large-scale program on the 2001 Daytona 500 and the circumstances surrounding it. It is not necessarily going to be a Dale Earnhardt video, although obviously, unavoidably, it's going to be a big part of it. My goal is to do it in a way much closer to 3 before February and providing the context from other events that happened at the time, both before, during, and after the race there. It's a series of 4 videos. I actually finished recording all 4 of them, or not all 4 of them, 3 of the 4. The 4th one, I'm actually just finished the script. I still need to record that one. But the other 3 have been finished recording. I still need to kind of get the graphics and stuff together and put that together. I don't have a release date yet, but I have put all my focus on the video portion on there and just getting those out. Those of you who are in the Patreon will have access to those videos first. I'm very excited to get these out. I've been kind of chomping at the bit to kind of get them going since I've been kind of starting to work on that back in April. But I think now will be a great time to kind of just put the finishing touches on it and just get them out there. So that's going to be a big project that I'm working on for that. So definitely check that out. But I'll have more updates on that too. I haven't posted the trailer yet. I want to post the trailer after the videos themselves are done so I can actually have a better idea of the release date. What I don't want to do, again, is set a release date and then have to kick it back because that just gets frustrating for everybody. So that's kind of my goal on that point there. But those of you who are in the Patreon, I believe it's at the $5 level and up, you can have access to that trailer now, and it's on there. But again, in terms of making it public, that's going to be a bit further down the line. And I may actually make some changes to the trailer too, so that's kind of coming up. So again, what was the dominant car on the NASCAR Winston Cup circuit in 1961? We got guesses for Ford Fairlane, Dodge Polara, Hudson Hornet, whatever Richard Petty drove, Pontiac Catalina, Nissan, Pontiac, Studebaker, Avanti, Dallara, Dodge. Yeah, see, it's all over the place. So there we go. Volkswagen Sambavan. There you go. You got everything. The Austin Mini. There you go. Let's see. What was the dominant car on the NASCAR Winston Cup circuit in 1961? The answer is Pontiac Grand Prix, apparently. Pontiac Grand Prix, it says. It did say 61, right? Not 81? That seems a little strange. The dominant car, 61. Yeah, that's what it says. Pontiac Grand Prix is the correct answer. I don't know if anybody guessed that. Somebody guessed, no, Pedro Fluffington, you guessed Pontiac. There you go. And Charles Peterson, you guessed Pontiac or Ford. And Maserati 9, you were close to it with the Catalina. Yeah, it says Grand Prix on this one. That's interesting. Yeah, that's what it says. That doesn't seem right. I don't know. Alrighty. Here we go. Okay, next question here. Who was the first female to earn an expert rating as a dirt track motorcycler? Who was the first female to earn an expert rating as a dirt track motorcycler? Yeah, make yes, model no. Yeah, that doesn't sound right. Grand Prix doesn't seem... That seems too contemporary to be 1961. And I don't think even in 81 it would have been the dominant one because Buick was so good with Darrell Waltrip. So, yeah. Who was the first female to earn an expert rating as a dirt track motorcycler? Okay. Alrighty. Who was the first female to earn an expert rating as a dirt track motorcycler? Gargura. Okay. Yeah, not quite. Carmen Sandiego, Patty Moise, Lynn St. James. We're having a lot of fun here. Natalie Decker, Janet Guthrie, Ethel Flock Mobley, Shauna Robinson. Okay, here we go. The answer is Tammy Jo Kirk. Tammy Jo Kirk is the correct answer. I don't think anybody got that one. Grand Prix wasn't introduced until 62. Okay, well, there we go. Then that would make sense. Next car make will be a NASCAR, Andrew. Yeah, Dodge. Yeah, I think Dodge seems like the most obvious choice. I was very intrigued that in Joey Arrington's interview, he basically said that they have the equipment ready. That if NASCAR called, if Dodge called and said, we want to go NASCAR racing, they have a lot of equipment still ready to go. Because fundamentally, the engines wouldn't really change too much. Obviously, the cars have changed significantly, and the way, I guess, stuff fits in there has changed. But, yeah, the power plants would be a bit different. Yeah, Tammy Jo Kirk is the correct answer. We'll do one more question. Yeah, we're over 2 hours here, so we're going to wrap up here in a bit. And I think... No, that one's... There we go. Alrighty. No, I think we had that one. Okay. Here's an interesting one. I think this is a good one to wrap up on. Here we go. Last question for the evening, folks. Last question is, what cautious driver was nicknamed the Turtle for bringing up the rear in races? It's a good last car question for you folks. What cautious driver was nicknamed the Turtle for bringing up the rear in races? Good job. Good luck pronouncing that one, bro. Yeah, there you go. It's Gargura, isn't it? Like, I'm familiar with the VTubers there. They always keep choking my, my playlist there on YouTube. You look one way or the other on YouTube. You can't look around without tripping over one there. So I'm afraid I am aware of some of those channels. Some of them are fun though. They got interesting personalities. What cautious driver was nicknamed the Turtle for bringing up the rear in races? Oh, the first model year of the Grand Prix was just a Catalina trim package. See, I didn't know that, Alexander. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I was not aware of that. Alrighty. Herman Beam, a lot of you got that. A lot of you guys are too good. And absolutely, this was mentioned in the book as well. What cautious driver was nicknamed the Turtle for bringing up the rear in races? The answer is indeed Herman Beam. Herman Beam, which absolutely the book. I was threw myself off there for a second. The book does mention a J.D. McDuffie book there because J.D. actually took great exception to being compared to Herman Turtle Beam. There was actually one time that a journalist actually said that it compared it to him since JD had so many struggles and dropped to the back of the pack there. But it's he said, like, look, don't compare me to him. When I drive to win. So that was interesting. And that was even in kind of like I think that was a later part of his career where things really were very difficult for him then. So it's kind of interesting to see how that shook out. But that would be another one too. So there you go. I wasn't able to watch the show last week, but thanks for the update. Okay, absolutely. So thank you for tuning in for sure. Well, there we go, folks. So that will do it for tonight. So congratulations again to Chase Elliott for your win today at Talladega. As if he's watching this show here. Who knows? Congratulations to him for the win in Talladega today. Ty Gibbs, unfortunately, your last place finisher, but will be the feature of Last Car Feature later tonight. In the meantime, the Patreon is patreon.com/LastCarOnBrock. My Twitter feed is @LastCarOnBrock. And our next show is going to be next week. After the races at the Charlotte Roval, we will know who is going to be advancing to the round of 8 next week. We will find out together, and we'll talk about it here on the program. Stay tuned. It'll be about 15-20 minutes after the race concludes. It's when the show usually starts, so feel free to hop in. Make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, so you know where to go when the race is over here. In the meantime, thank you so much, everyone, for watching. Have a safe week, everyone, and I'll see you next time.